All right, welcome back to the Daily Mastermind. George Wright III with your daily dose of inspiration, motivation, and education. And I am joined on the podcast today by a great guest. I'm looking forward to introducing you to Florian Rolke. How are you doing, Florian?
Very good. Thank you. I'm glad to be here, George. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm glad our schedules lined up because you have some really cool knowledge and a great story, and I really feel like it'll be inspirational for people that are listening to the podcast. So before we get going, let me just give everybody a little bit of a taste as to why, they know I don't do a lot of interviews on the podcast. It's just individuals that I really feel will bring a lot of value, and so I want them to know a little bit about you. So if this is your first time listening, by the way, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. I want you to be with us every day. My goal is to help you to unleash your potential and create your best life. And Florian's here because, look, he's a high performance coach specializing in AI entrepreneurs and investors and family office generational wealth. And what his main focus is to help people gain clarity, focus, and strategic momentum. And so he's got a very deep background in business psychology, personal development. He's studied over 170 books and attended a ton of seminars and really mastered the science of success. So we're going to get into his story a bit and some of the things that he feels helps his clients. But Florian, maybe what you could do for us is, for those that don't know you, give us a little bit of your backdrop before we get into a whole bunch of the rest. Where did you come from? What was your journey? What sort of brought you into this realm of what you do today? So give us a little bit of your background and journey.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, George. And yeah, the backstory has been evolved over the last 11 years now. And the first 7 years were fairly humbling and fairly humble, I have to say. So I had the good fortune of starting personal development very, very early. So I left school when I was 18, graduated, had very good grades. And so there was a promising future for me, at least from the academic path of how you think about life. When you finish school, you get good grades, everything is open, but they don't necessarily teach you about the real life skills and about the skills of personal development and skill acquisition, do they?
Yeah.
So I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. So I went to Australia, furthest away from Germany, where I was born and raised, as I could. And I started to gather some life experience. I was selling door to door, fresh produce, strawberries. It's a very humbling first experience.
Wow.
But high volume sales, I realized that a lot of people who do well later in life in business, they tend to have a background in sales. And it's either cold calling or door to door. So it was very, very beneficial to you a whole lot about yourself and about people. And yeah, strawberries are a great product to get your foot in the door. A lot of people said yes to that. How could you not?
You learned. Yeah. Well, why not? Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so that was my humble beginnings. And then I came back to Germany and realized that I really needed to clean up my life. I still didn't have a girlfriend back then. I was smoking, drinking, a lot of alcohol, really going down a bad path. Apart from doing well in school, I didn't do well in life. Yes, I knew how to relate to people, but there were a lot of things that I needed to clean up. And it was a wake-up moment to me when I came back, when I was then 20 years old, being in my old room and looking around and realizing I haven't really progressed at all in those 2 years where I was away. So I stumbled across, I opened a drawer in my old desk and there was a manual of the persuasive oratory course that I've took back in middle school. And that led me to a video by a body language teacher. And then eventually led me to a video by Jim Rohn called Live a Mediocre Life in 1984 in Anaheim, California. And it was so impressive on me that I just listened to that audio probably 60 to 80 times in my car. There were other audio programs. It was the first thing that I found. And the message of, it sounds so simple, the message of, if you want to change your life, you can. Like, you can change your life by action. It wasn't part of my mindset. Growing up in Germany, in the GDR, of where was a lot of Soviet rule, and my parents, my grandparents, it was ingrained in them through the school system and through how they were brought up. And that changed my life. So I bought a pair of dumbbells and a crate of used books from Amazon because Jim Rohn said, the book you don't read won't help. You better read. Right? And
Exactly.
So that's how I got started. And everything from the intersection between philosophy and psychology, all the old classics from psychotherapy, even psychoanalysis, Freud in the original. And I didn't really know what I was looking for. I didn't even know what. I just knew I had to read and like lift some weights and just try to clean up my life. And so this is where I started. I inscribed myself in business psychology, went to college for a year, realized I was way too slow and I wanted it more pure. So I started my own business instead, served the industrial paint manufacturing industry in Germany because that was a business that my father was working in. And so I knew that a little bit and I'm like, yeah, I'm so good at marketing. I'm going to apply that here. And it did kind of work, but I also realized it was not quite my true passion. And then I went deeper into personal development, got some public
Wow.
speaking.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting you say that because a lot of people don't know what they're looking for, but they know that there's something more. And then some piece of information, whether it's an audio, a video, a person, and Jim Rohn, I mean, he's a master. He is definitely one of the fathers of personal development. Jim Rohn gave you this opportunity to change your life. And even then, though, it sounds like you didn't really know what you wanted to do. You just decided, I'm going to go get some dumbbells. I'm going to start working out. I'm going to start doing things. And so you proceeded to start going through, and I mentioned as you got going here, 170 books, tons of seminars. What gave you this voracious, if that's how you say it, appetite for personal development? Because there's a lot of people I know that are like, I heard that message and that changed my life. But you seem to really go heavy into personal development and mindset. Why do you think that was?
Yeah, a couple of reasons. First of all, yeah, you see there in the back wall, 2 of those certificates are from Tony Robbins' company. Jim Rohn was Tony Robbins' original teacher. And Tony Robbins always says when he works in seminars with people and they don't know what they want, oftentimes he's starting with, where do we want to go? What do you want? They don't know. And then he goes, what do you don't want? What don't you want? What do you want not anymore in your life? And so this is what it was for me. I just knew that the way I was living, I did not want. Because it was looking down at me. I was fairly skinny, not very strong. Didn't really like the situation that I couldn't relate to women, even though I wanted very much to, but I just didn't have the skill. Although I had this verbal capacity, you know, since I was 2-3 years old, people have been telling me, man, if you don't become a teacher of some kind, like, then there would be, you got to do something with your voice. You got to do something with talking, right? And
I know
so
your voice is way better than mine. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's got like a voice for like oratory and speaking, right?
Thousands of hours of practice. That also didn't come natural. I can send you some videos 5 years ago.
Wow.
This very high pitched voice, very trying, forcing, very pleasing. And that's all practice. That's part of my message too, is like, we got to put in the hours and practice. Life changed action through behaviors. And you uploaded this great video yesterday where you went through the last 2 of your 10, I forgot what you were calling it, but micro habits was one of them, neuroplasticity and then the visualization and strategic micro habits that compound.
Yeah.
That's so important, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. But I also like what you said, and I want to make sure I really emphasize that for our listeners. You don't have to know what you want, but you do need to just start taking action because along the way, you're going to create what you want. But it is interesting that you say, and I haven't heard this a lot, so I like that you said, but if you don't know what you want, you can really identify what you don't want. Most people do know what they don't want, right? And that's what you did. And as a result, you just started taking action to move away from that, which is amazing.
Certainly. And that's all credit to Tony Robbins, because usually what you want is very close to the inverse of what you don't want if you play it out. Very interesting. So there are lots of psychological reasons why people can't come up with what they want. That can be perfectionism, that can be not wanting to make a mistake, many different things. But if you ask them what you don't want, they're usually more clear on that. And then you as a coach or as a seminar facilitator can then inverse that and feed that back to them so that they say, well, yeah, that's actually kind of what I want. So if I look down at me and said, I'm skinny, I don't have a girlfriend, and I don't know what to do with my life, then probably the inverse of that is I would love to have a loving relationship, be a little bit more physically capable, and have a direction, right?
That is such a great point. You know, you think about people do know what they don't want, and it usually is the inverse of that. Why do you think people don't recognize that? Is it that they are almost sometimes afraid of what they do know what they want, but they don't think they can get it? Or because you're right. It's very intuitive. If you know what you don't want, you most likely know what you want. You've worked with a lot of individuals, and maybe sometimes it just takes going that roundabout way. So, let me ask you this. What took you from your passion of personal development and all the knowledge that you were doing into the actual field of working with people and coaching and consulting high net worth, business owners and things like that? What was there, a moment, a pivot moment, or did you just evolve into that business?
So when I was telling the story, these were basically the first 2 or 3 years. There are another many years until this point we're talking about. But when I was in college, after the second semester, I was always listening to these business podcasts, right? And one of the speakers there, by the name of Maxim Mankiewicz in Germany still, he was giving seminars, personal development seminars, and his take on that was that he was distilling the best practices of past and present geniuses, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Nikola Tesla, and even modern people that we consider outstanding in their field. And he was breaking that down into the habits and their mindsets and their daily actions and teaching that in a seminar. And so I was listening to that on a podcast, and I realized I just needed to meet this person, because the same bookish pursuit of knowledge was very appealing to me. And so I went there, and the first time I set foot in that seminar, it sounds like I made up the story, but it was just like an inner knowing that this is what I want to do in my life. It's like, I looked around like, if I can make money doing that, public speaking, being on stage and transferring the knowledge of some kind, that's what I wanted to do. So that was clear for me. But still, my life wasn't quite working out in the way that I thought it should, right? And so this is where the journey of the actual work started, where I had to look at the topics within. And part of my upbringing that I haven't talked about is that I had very loving parents. They put a lot of emphasis on education and experiences. We were going to a lot of holiday parks and science museums. They really took care of our education, my brother and I. But they were also quite confused. From my mother's side, all three children of my grandparents, so my mother and her sister, they both ended up committing suicide. And her brother, my uncle as well, he worked himself into the ground, and one day he just passed out, and yeah, he just worked himself into the ground. And I asked myself, why is that we have these invisible things that seem to be affecting us so much? And especially because I was running the same patterns. A lot of people here in the audience, and you probably as well, have realized from reading books on psychotherapy and psychology that oftentimes people do end up living out the same patterns that their parents, but even though they don't want to. So for example, they were physically abused as a child, as horribly as it is. And then usually the person says, I will never do this. I will never be like my father who did this. But then at some point you realize, man, I'm just like my father in these moments where the anger comes up. And a lot of people have that, right? Or I will never cheat. I will never be cheated on, right? These types of patterns that are so ingrained in us. And I realized that I was living out the same kind of depressed, manic depression kind of cycles, even though I tried so hard not to do that. And that really led me to the work with psychedelics, with ayahuasca, with hypnotherapy, with all kinds of things, in order to really pinpoint these psychological forces inside of us that make us live out these patterns. And that's what I believe is one of my unique things that I want to bring to the world of personal development, that I'm able to articulate that for people. So if somebody comes to me and they struggle with something that they can't explain, a habit that they don't want to do, or they can't do something that they feel they should be doing, why that is, I've gained the capacity to articulate that and to help people with that. Because here's the thing, once people can identify it and have language for the pattern, they are no longer identified with it. So you can't even abstract from it and explain it or give a name to it. You are identified with it. You're in it. You're living it out. But once you have the capacity to identify it, it breaks the identification with the pattern. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think most people are in the movie. They're
Yes.
it's like we're watching a movie and the lights are out and you're so into it that you're scared, you're fearful, you're rooting for the hero, but they're in the movie. And I love that analogy, because I think you're right. I think until you become the conscious observer of not just your life, but your thoughts and everything, I think you are absolutely right. And it's interesting because you've had such a hard journey that a lot of times people will be overwhelmed and it'll take them down. You were able to kind of notice that, but I think you do have that gift for the two things you said. I kind of like to say the awareness and seeing what's going on, but you have that because a lot of people without a coach or a mentor, like they don't have the ability to even see their patterns. You have the awareness and identification, but then the ability to articulate that, because usually it's, I would hope you would agree, multiple levels deeper than they think it is anyway, right? They just, on the surface, I get angry. Well, why is that? Because, I don't like my job. Well, why is that? And it's this level, but you have this ability to articulate it. And I've noticed, I was going to ask you, you really do emphasize, and you mentioned it a minute ago, habits and mannerisms. And I think to be successful, you talk about how that's so important. Could you give us some ideas of what you think are ways you can shift, or maybe even back up from that? How do people identify their patterns and start to begin to do that? And what are some shifts they can take to change them? Because that's the hard part, right? Changing. Do you have some suggestions on what ways people can start to shift their mannerisms and their habits?
Yeah, definitely. Let's unpack that. So that's a two-sided answer. First of all, how do people identify that? Well, I do believe in the power of talking to people. Yes, I believe that it is beneficial to hire a coach, but this is not meant to be a sales pitch. Even if you don't hire a coach, talk to friends. People don't do that. Another thing that we can go into is the framework that I help facilitate for people in order for them to do better in their life. One of those 4 factors is friends, including spouse. But most people realize that having a supportive spouse is beneficial. Most, or a lot of people, do not see the value of friends and people that you can talk to on a weekly basis as a habit. Consult with other people and get their feedback. This is a way how you can get perception and awareness on those patterns. Like,
you actually make a point, and I don't mean to interrupt you. You make a great point. Most people just see friendship as, oh, that's the fun stuff, da, da, da. What you're saying is there's a real tangible, specific result in your life helping you to identify things through friendships. That's a great point.
Yeah. And tying it also back to the previous question of how long I've been doing that and coaching people, I've been talking to people for a lot of years. Even in those years where I was still struggling myself, I had a few people from back in the days, very selected. A lot of people I had to let go of in my life. But a few people, even though they weren't financially successful, but they had one area or one certain strength that we could help each other with. And so we were weekly having accountability calls and connecting with each other, because I was able to point out something in him, and he had the maturity and the awareness and the willingness to do better in order to hear me, and vice versa as well. So I'm really a proponent of making things easy and practical. If you don't want to hire a coach, talk to friends and be willing to be told the things that you don't want to see. That's how people gain awareness. And now the second piece to the answer, how do you actually shift that? Yeah, unfortunately, that does depend on the person. It does depend on how the person receives reinforcement the best. For some people, it is easier to do things together with people, with friends. That's one way to do that. Other people like to utilize technology and apps, calendar reminders. They like to schedule that. That is another way how you can form better habits. Another way is to just really get clear on why that is. So some people get motivated by realizing that their past failure to do that has gotten them to the point, and by re-emphasizing the pain, which they can also do for themselves, of revisualizing that, is what's driving them. For some other people, it's the future outlook. And now we can go deeper into Tony Robbins' psychology of human needs and all of that. I know you've been talking about that on your channel as well. In the meta program, some people are more towards, some people are more away from. Some people, for them, I have a client that really does it for him. When he looks back at his past and says, okay, I am not doing this, and the reason why I'm here at this point where I don't want to be is because I failed to do so in the past. That's what is doing it for him. For some other person, he's like, okay, let me help me out. Like, let's get clear on the future vision, where I'm going. And once I see that, once I put like an image in front of me, like a vision board, this is what does it for me. I'm sure in another 20, 30 years, I will have a more precise answer. But right now, it really
No,
depends on the person.
I'm telling you, Florian, that's beautiful how you say that, because I think you're breaking it down for people to realize you've got to be aware of it. You've got to identify it.
Yep.
Obviously, you're great at helping to articulate that, but you said something that a lot of people don't really say in the personal development space. They give you all these lists and all these people in personal development. Okay, I'm going to meditate and gratitude and vision board and take action and all these things. Doing something that works for you,
Exactly.
personalizing habits that work for you. And if you don't, a lot of times, obviously with a coach or a mentor, they can help you to identify what's really getting you the results. But I think that's beautiful, man. Like I think that is really what creates the results, is personalizing your approach so that you can get results. You can beat your head against the wall all day long with affirmations or vision board. And if that's not what gets you going, where do you go? So I like that you said that. That's huge.
Yeah, for some people, it really is a circle of friends that they surround themselves with. For me, I'm a very visual person. The background on my phone, the background on my laptop is a motivational image. I don't look at a meadow like the standard Windows background. It's not helpful for me, because the things that you behold habitually, they do something for you. Auditory as well. I've made myself my own affirmations and incantations where I basically went through hundreds of sentences that were meaningful to me and really cutting it down to like, what are the 25 to 50 sentences that are most impactful for me, right?
Yeah.
And then listening to that over and over in the shower. So, for example, all of the answers and resources are inside of me and within reach. That's for me very impactful and very important, because it also carries to other people that I'm working with. Just very tiny example on that end. I was working with a client, and I noticed that he had a really good handwriting, and he was trying to break out of his job. That was a few years ago when I was working with him. But then I talked to him, I was like, did you realize that these posts on LinkedIn that are handwritten are doing so incredibly well? That can literally be your habit to freedom. Your resource of having this good handwriting is a true resource. And so by me incantating that and like reinforcing the awareness within myself of making the most out of the resources that I have, carries over to the people that I'm working with as well. It's very, very interesting how that works. When you really believe a thought, I mean, we can geek out on that, but
that's so true. Absolutely. And it is also interesting to me how sometimes some of the most successful people, because personal development isn't for people not having success. I mean, some of your clients, some people that I've worked with over the years, some of the most successful people struggle with self-doubt, struggle with lack of clarity, lack of focus, which kind of leads me to one of the questions I was going to ask you. One of the core things I believe, and I think you've articulated this, that you do in your purpose for helping individuals and these AI SaaS founders and B2B AI owners and family office, generational wealth individuals, is to create focus and clarity. Could you kind of speak to what do you do and how do you approach creating focus and clarity? What do you mean by, because, obviously people hear focus and clarity all the time, but in business, what does that mean?
Yeah, focus, first of all, means what do you focus on in your business? There are many things that you can do, but they are the right things to do at the right time, aligned with the strategy. And this is where the focus comes in. So are we working on implementing a sales process this quarter? Or are we incorporating a new social media channel? Or do we say no to a new social media channel and just do 3 times more of what we're already doing, what's working on the social media channel? And in investing as well, families oftentimes ask themselves, well, AI is a great opportunity, blockchain, Web3, but we know commercial real estate. Does it make sense for us to go in there? And if we don't, is there a way how we can utilize that in order to enhance our primary focus of investment so that it is not a pivot, but rather a strategic taking additional resources to align with the one strategy that we've already committed to and have decades and sometimes centuries of experience with.
Yeah.
Right? So focus means, what do we do? Where does our collective thought energy move towards? Also for our teams, because as the leader, we set the direction and then the team, if we're a good leader, they will follow that. And so what's the process of going about that? That is also a very individual
Yes.
individual case. But what I usually do is I find out what is really important for the person and what are their criteria for decision making. So if we decide on something, there's a reason why we would consider either yes or no. And then we can play it out. That's usually where my conversations come in, where we really find out what is the one outcome that we want to get done, ideally, in this call. And then we can take 45 minutes to really go deep on this one thing, because once we get this right, it's worth it. It's worth to spend 30 or 45 minutes just on this one thing. And so then we play it out. Why would you do that? Okay. And what would be the risk involved with that? And why would you doubt that? And then, okay, because of this person and this team member, but we've also committed that and these resources are here. Okay. And then we go through a process of basically bringing it together. And that's more of an intuitive art, in the same way as Tony Robbins. He has his 7 master steps of lasting change, but what he does is quite intuitive. And yeah, from that point, I just let my past experience kind of work with it. But what it really is finding the criteria for decision making. And this is oftentimes not quite so obvious, because oftentimes people think they should be making the decision based on a decision making criteria which is not really aligned with what they would actually decide on if nobody else was involved and had any influence over the decision, right?
Well, and life and business is so complicated. I was doing a podcast the other day. I'm a co-host on the Franklin Planner podcast, and we were talking about the digital overwhelm. So sometimes it's hard to get clarity and focus when you're barraged with things. In fact, it reminded me, as I was planning for our discussion, about how you did a lot of deep work in Peru. And, it kind of shaped your coaching style because of stillness of awareness. Tell me how that, because it's the opposite of the digital overwhelm, right? But you had a lot of experience and time in Peru, and you had said that really influenced your style for getting grounded and becoming still and things like this. Could you speak to that? Because I think a lot of people have trouble blocking out the noise, which I think is critical to create focus, right?
100%. And this is always a reflection of your inner state. The reason why people oftentimes, so when I speak to AI SaaS and app founders, oftentimes they have challenges committing to just one thing, because they tend to have different businesses, different partners, different opportunities. And in the same way as it is hard for a person to commit to just one spouse, it is also hard to just commit to one person. And there are 2 main reasons that so far I've identified. The first reason for that is, what if it doesn't work? And the second reason is, what if I did everything that I could and it would still not work? That's an even deeper reason that I oftentimes see, where people, when they commit to just one thing, the fear is there. Okay, now if I put myself on the line and I did everything right, I am narrow, I am focused, and I do all of the right things, what would that say about me if it still wasn't enough? And the reason, and the answer would be, well, it would give you accurate feedback that you would just need to persist more on the path that you've chosen. But this is why it's so important to articulate all of these things, because once you face it and once you speak it out with somebody, it's not so scary anymore.
Right.
Once you say, it's like, man, I don't know if I can, if I can share this about myself. What if people leave me? What if people hate me? What if my spouse or my father or whoever the person is, what if they never talk to me again? What if my business partner leaves and then I sit here in this debt? Yeah, we want to confront that. We want to speak this through, right? What would be the scenarios that we envision? So that was the piece on the inner work, and how that was the point that I want to make as well. How the inner cleanup facilitates a cleanup on the outside. It's so interesting how these mirror principles tend to work. Once we clean up inside of ourselves, and once we know who we are and what our strengths are and what we feel inclined to and not, and what works for us, exactly what we've spoken about before. Is it visualization? What is it, right? Once we're clear about that, and once our physical space is also clear, what we surround ourselves with, we see that things clean up on the outside as well. When we clean up on the inside, things clean up on the outside as well. And so, in the same way as some people, like it was the case with me when I was younger and chasing different women out of the significance of validation of having multiple partners. And as much as I look back now and say that this was a huge mistake, it was a reflection of my own disorder inside of myself. And
Yeah.
then you manifest disorder on the outside in the same way as if you don't have this very deep grounded sense of who you are attracted to different opportunities and you're more prone to like switch paths and not commit to anything. And this is where this inner spiritual transformation takes place and has real effects. Oftentimes people think like, what's the benefit of this healing work? Why would I go see a therapist or drink ayahuasca or go do mushrooms or sit in the mountains for a week or take a breathwork retreat or sit in silence in a sensory deprivation? What would that be? What would the benefits of that be? Well, these are the benefits, that the manifestations on the outside will be different because they're not resonant anymore with the disorder inside. Very, very interesting. And so, in Peru, I've worked with that a lot. I know that a lot of people who are listening may not resonate with that, and I'm sure that I lose respect for some people for that, but I don't care. It's part of my brand. And I must say that it helped me a lot.
Correct. And that's the thing is you can only speak your truth. And at the same token, I think what people are becoming more and more aware of, because personal development 1.0 is what the mind of man can conceive and believe he can achieve through a positive attitude, Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. Personal development 2.0 is your inner world creates your outer world. And that outer world is not where you get the validation, the success, and things like that if it's not first grounded in stable, specific, clear, focused inner work. And so I think that's huge. You said another thing. I think I was listening to another deal that you were doing, and you made a comment that I thought kind of caught me off guard, but it made a lot of sense. And I wanted you to explain it. You said you believe that mindset itself is a form of action.
Yes.
And I thought, well, usually inner work and mindset is not action. So what do you mean by that? Your mindset itself is a form of action. Can you explain that?
100%. And thank you for bringing that up. You are asking amazing questions. That's where we vibe so well, because you know the industry and all of the doubts and the what ifs that people have around that. It's beautiful. And
but it got my attention is the point. So obviously you got some really good content there. So I love it. Go ahead.
And so personal development needs some innovation as well. Definitely. And I think it can be much more action focused because, as we all know, life changes through action. But there are also a lot of invisible forces that affect our action taking. If it were so easy, everybody would do it.
Yeah.
Right? If you go to any kind of motivational Instagram quote page, you know all of the things that you need to be doing. Take a cold shower or don't, and get up and eat well and exercise and surround yourself with the right people. And it's like, it's nothing new to people. But why don't we? And these are these invisible forces that affect us, that are numerous, and we don't need to get into that right now. What I mean by that is also, when I say mindset is action, it is habitual. So when sensation is being evaluated, it becomes perception. We have a sensory input, and then we give meaning to it, and then it becomes a perception, right? We perceive it in a way of, is it relevant to us, right? If you are about to get married, other things, rings, dresses, at least they are appealing to you. When you're looking for a new car, the old story, you see the car everywhere. We know that. And so, and when you're like a drug addict, then other things stand out to you as if you are a wealth-oriented, growth-oriented person where you're like, this person, maybe I can ask him a question when you're looking for a mentor and when you're young. You see what I mean? Other kinds of ideas are attractive to you.
Yeah.
Mindset is an action in the way that it is a habitual set of evaluations. For example, when something bad happens, right now, for example, the internet should go out or I have a blackout because it's the rainy season here in Peru, I would train myself to say, oh, well, that would be an opportunity to connect with George once again and to hold my ground and to not get angry at myself, which would be the default response, right? It's the set of habitual behaviors of what you do with a certain perception. So in the same way, yes, I can go around here in this nice little jungle town where I tend to live, and there are a lot of beautiful women. And so is my default set for the perception to go look at the attractive characteristics of that woman, or is my mindset focus on something else? when
Yeah,
I
I
see
love that.
somebody in a conversation, what is the opportunity? Is my mind set towards judgment and my own insecurity of trying to tear the other person down, of like, oh man, you are so much more successful, and then I try to rip on your magazine and how you look and whatever to try to bring you down. A lot of people do that, don't they? In order
Yeah.
for them to feel better when they get a little bit insecure. Or is my mind set towards building you up and finding things that I can throw you the ball, so to speak, in the sense of how can I elevate you and your perception on this show? How can I
Yeah.
give, right? That's what I mean with mindset, because as we are wired in life, we form certain sets of habitual evaluations, heuristics
Yes.
in this way, for us to process life in an easier way. And this is what I understand by mindset. And this is also action, because we drive it into our nervous system.
Yes.
Repeated actions.
Yeah. I love because I heard you say it when we were talking earlier, but it's, well, one of my mentors, that one of the very first mentors that I learned from was Robert Stuberg, who ran Nightingale Conant. He helped Tony Robbins, Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer build all their programs and things like that. And he started his own program, and we became partners before he passed away. But he used to call it your philosophy. Your philosophy being your thought patterns that you talk about. He said the same thing you did. It's a decision. It's not it's not some magic recipe. You can decide life happens for you or to you. You can decide what you want and go get it. But your thought and your philosophy, that lens is going to affect everything you do. Because if you're a victim, if you feel like your past has defined you versus you defining your past, that's a philosophy. And so I love that you said it in a way that was like, mindset is a form of action, because it's a decision, and you do decide your philosophy. Of course, we have beliefs and things have influenced us, but you can choose to adopt that as a philosophy or not. Wouldn't you agree?
100%. 100%.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, man, I wish we had a lot more time. We don't. We're kind of out of time, but I want to do this before we go. Where is the best place for people to connect with you? Because I think not only conversations, but coaching, mentoring, everything like this. I think you've got a great philosophy and a great way about you. Where's the best place for people to connect with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn, definitely. I mean, a book is in the process, but it is still in the process, and it will be coming out when the process is done. So I will not promise that yet. For now, connect with me and shoot me a message on LinkedIn. People may find me from, whether they're a family office, CIO or CEO would be different than somebody who's just generally struggling in life and needs some advice for a coach. Look, I will reply to people and give them what they need. So hit me up on LinkedIn. That would be the place where I'm most active.
Great. And I'll listen, if you're listening to the show, I'll put Florian's information and his links in the show notes. You can check out the show notes. But I highly recommend you kind of start to having those conversations. You've learned a lot here today. I think that, finding your path, taking action, really working on your inner game. I think all of that is so, so important. So connect with Florian. And before we take out and take off here, Florian, do you have any last thoughts or anything you'd like to leave, the listeners with?
What you behold is what you become. Be very careful, very, very careful of what you let into your mind. Jim Rohn said that your mind is a garden. You got to pull out weeds constantly. You got to attend to it. Like it's a piece of real estate. Sometimes things get rusty. You got to maintain the garden. You got to maintain the thoughts as well. I would want to encourage people to ask themselves, do they really need that much stimulation and information, and what it really does to their minds, what kind of foreign thoughts it is planting in their minds that may not be their own. Because for a lot of people, they have enough information. They should listen to their own thoughts and their own positive thoughts much more than all the variety of even a lot of podcasts and a lot of shows. Like, people have enough information. They should take action, listen to their own thoughts, the positive thoughts that they want to be listening to, and then come back and listen more. So be careful.
That's great advice. Yeah, that's great advice. And it aligns perfectly. One of the reasons I wanted you on the show with what I believe, and that is that, we all have greatness inside of us. More than likely, you don't need anything outside of you to really become and create the life that you were meant to live, but you do need to do the work. And creating, like Florian said, clarity and focus and identifying your thoughts and sitting with your thoughts and doing the work. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, it may seem like hard work, but it's not as hard as life. I mean, life is going to be a lot harder work than most of you want anyway. So listen, if you're listening to this for the first time, like I said, make sure you follow us, and do me a favor, share this show. People need to hear the message. I think Florian has a lot of great stuff to be able to give to the marketplace. And so share the show. Make sure you hit us up on the Daily Mastermind. And once again, I really believe that you can live the life that you're meant to live, and it's who you surround yourself with, those conversations like you're having with Florian and myself today. So appreciate you being here. Appreciate you listening. Once again, my name is George Wright III, and I look forward to talking with you tomorrow. Have a great day.